The moment she whispered, "You can leave now." "I understand." The room seemed to stop breathing, because the smile that lived between them all evening collapsed into something fragile and apologetic. And in that single second he realized this was the exact moment he had spent years preparing his heart for without knowing it. As a single father who had learned to survive disappointment quietly, who had learned how hope could feel like a dangerous luxury. And yet, here he was, sitting across from a woman whose eyes carried the same exhaustion he saw every night in the mirror. The kind earned through sacrifice, sleepless nights, and loving a child more than life itself. And as our words settled between them like a test neither of them had agreed to take, memories flooded him of the years after his wife passed away, of learning how to braid hair with trembling hands, of pretending strength while collapsing in private, of choosing his child over companionship again and again because the world had a way of reminding him that single parents were often seen as baggage rather than blessings. And now this date, meant to be simple and cautious and almost forgettable, had become something far more dangerous. Because it was honest. Because it was raw. Because she had just revealed the part of herself that people usually hid until rejection did the talking for them. And as she waited for him to stand up, to thank her politely, to disappear like so many before him, he noticed the subtle tremor in her hands and the way she held herself as if bracing for impact. And that was when he understood the true weight of the moment, because this was not about romance or attraction or convenience. This was about dignity. About whether two people who had been shaped by loss and responsibility could recognize each other without fear. And so instead of standing, he stayed. Instead of leaving, he leaned forward, and instead of seeing her confession as an ending, he felt something unfamiliar open inside him. A recognition that felt like coming home. And he spoke not to impress her, but to honor her, telling her about his own child, about the nights he sat beside a hospital bed terrified of a fever that would not break, about the birthdays he worked double shifts to afford, about how love had taught him resilience rather than bitterness. And with every word, the space between them changed, because she was no longer apologizing for who she was, and he was no longer hiding who he had become, and the conversation deepened into something neither of them expected, touching on fears of failing their children, of being judged, of longing for connection while refusing to compromise their values, and somewhere between shared laughter and quiet tears, the high-stakes truth emerged that this was not a fairy tale moment, but a human one, fragile and uncertain and powerful, and when the evening ended it did not close with promises or declarations, only with a mutual understanding that something meaningful had begun, something rooted in compassion rather than fantasy. And weeks later, as their lives slowly intertwined through playground conversations, school pickups, and late-night talks about boundaries and trust, the bond that formed was not explosive, but enduring, built on patience and respect, and the true emotional payoff arrived not in a dramatic gesture, but in a quiet scene where their children played together, unaware of how much courage it had taken for two adults to choose honesty over fear. And as he watched her laugh freely for the first time, no longer bracing for rejection, he realized that the moment she had given him permission to leave was the moment they both had chosen to stay, proving that sometimes the deepest love stories begin not with perfection, but with the bravery to show up as you are and trust that the right person will recognize the strength hidden inside your scars. And yet the story did not end there, because real change never arrives all at once. It unfolds in quiet tests that reveal who people truly are. And in the days that followed that first honest night, both of them felt the old fears creeping back in. The voices that whispered that happiness was temporary and loss was inevitable. And there were moments when schedules clashed, when exhaustion won, when misunderstandings felt heavier because they both carried the responsibility of protecting a child who depended on them. And one evening, after a long shift and a missed school recital, he almost pulled away, convinced that closeness would only lead to disappointment, while she sat alone in her car outside her apartment wondering if she had misread everything, wondering if once again she had asked too much simply by existing as she was. And that was when the true high-stakes moment arrived, not with raised voices or dramatic exits, but with a decision to speak instead of retreat, because he showed up at her door with nothing but honesty, admitting his fear of failing someone he cared about, admitting how deeply he had been hurt before, and she listened without interrupting, without judgment, because she understood that kind of fear intimately. And when she finally spoke, she did not ask him to promise forever or to be stronger than he was. She only asked that they choose effort over escape. And in that exchange, something solid formed a bond, not built on romance. Alone but unshared resilience, and slowly their lives began to reflect that choice through small acts of presence. Through standing beside each other at school meetings, through learning how to discipline without undermining, how to support without controlling, how to love without erasing themselves. And the children noticed first, sensing safety before adults ever named it. And one quiet afternoon, as he watched his child lean comfortably against her, trusting without hesitation, the weight of the years he had spent guarding his heart finally lifted. Because he saw that love did not demand perfection. It asked for courage, consistency, and compassion. And in that realization, the story reached its deeper truth. The two people who had been ready to walk away had instead created something lasting by staying present through uncertainty, proving that the most powerful connections are not born from flawless beginnings, but from the willingness to meet each other honestly, again and again, even when fear insists otherwise. The final moment came not with a dramatic declaration, but with a quiet scene that carried more weight than any words ever could. Because months later, on an ordinary evening filled with unfinished homework and mismatched dinner plates, they found themselves sitting on the floor, surrounded by toys, listening to the sound of shared laughter drifting through the room. And he realized that the tension he once carried in his chest had softened into something steady and warm. While she noticed that for the first time in years, she was no longer bracing herself for abandonment. And when her child asked a simple question about whether this was what family felt like, neither of them rushed to answer, because they both understood that family was not defined by titles or it was defined by showing up even when life was messy, exhausting, and uncertain. And in that shared silence, they acknowledged how far they had come from that first date where fear nearly sent them running in opposite directions. Realizing that dignity had guided them, sacrifice had strengthened them, and compassion had stitched together wounds they never thought would heal. And as the night settled and the house grew still, he looked around and understood that the high-stakes moment that changed his life was not the instant he chose to stay at the table, but the countless small choices afterward to remain present, to respect another person's truth, and to believe that broken histories did not disqualify anyone from love. And that realization stayed with him long after the lights went out. A quiet certainty that sometimes the bravest thing people can do is refuse to walk away, allowing something honest and human to grow where fear once stood.